"Come inside,"
he said, and took a step back. I followed him into an area of cubicles separated by low partitions. Clerical personnel, lots of them. So far, this was going about as I'd expected. But now it would get more interesting. Lipton might be softer than I had expected, but he had powerful connections in Dallas. This office building was in one of the most upscale residential commercial parts of the city. "I'm Mr. Potter," I said, as we walked down a corridor with fabric-covered walls. At least I played Mr. Potter the last time we talked in the wolf's den. Lipton didn't turn, didn't respond in any way. We entered a wood-paneled office, and he shut the door. The large room had half a dozen windows and a panoramic view. A hat rack near the door held a collection of autographed Dallas Cowboy and Texas Ranger caps.
"I still don't know what this is about, but I'll give you exactly 5 minutes to explain yourself. I don't think you know who you're talking to."
"Actually, I do. You're Henry Lipton's oldest son. You're married with 3 children and a nice house in Highland Park. You're also involved with a kidnapping and murder scheme that we've been tracking closely for several weeks. You're Sterling, and I want you to understand something. All your connections, all your father's connections in Dallas will not help you now. On the other hand, I would like to protect your family as much as possible. That's up to you. I'm not bluffing. I don't ever bluff. This is a federal crime, not a local one."
"I'm going to call my lawyer,"
Lawrence Lipton said, and went for the phone. "You have that right, but I wouldn't if I were you. It won't do any good." My tone of voice, something, stopped Lipton from making the call. His flabby hand moved away from the phone on his desk.
"Why?"
I said, "I don't care about you. You're involved in murder. But I've seen your kids, your wife. We've been watching you at the house. We've already spoken to your neighbors and friends. When you're arrested, your family will be in danger. We can protect them from the wolf." Lipton's face and neck reddened, and he erupted with,
"What the hell is wrong with you? Are you crazy? I'm a respected businessman. I never kidnapped or harmed another human being in my life. This is crazy."
"You gave the orders. The money came to you. Mr. Potter sent you $125,000. Or rather, the FBI did."
"I'm calling my lawyer. This is ridiculous and insulting. I don't have to take this from anybody."
I shrugged. "Then you're going down in the worst possible way. These offices will be searched immediately. And then your home in Highland Park. Your parents' home in Kessler Park will be searched. Your father's office will be searched. Your wife's offices at the Museum of Art will be searched." He picked up his phone. I could see that his hand was shaking, though. Then he whispered,
"Go fuck yourself."
I pulled out a two-way and spoke into it. "Hit the offices and the houses," I said. I turned back to Lipton. "You're under arrest. You can call your lawyer now. Tell him you've been taken to the FBI offices." Minutes later, a dozen agents stormed into the office with its gorgeous city views and stylish and expensive furnishings. We arrested Sterling. Chapter 96.
Pasha Sorokin was close by, and he was watching everyone and everything with great interest. Maybe it was time to show the FBI how these things were done in Moscow, to show them that this wasn't a child's game to be played with rules made up by the police. He had been there outside Sterling's office building in Dallas when the FBI team rushed inside. More than a dozen of them came calling. A strange assemblage, to be sure, some dressed in dark business suits, others in dark blue windbreakers with FBI boldly imprinted on the back. Who did they really expect to find here? The wolf? Others from the wolf's den? They had no concept of what they were getting themselves into. Their dark sedans and vans were parked in plain view on the street. Less than 15 minutes after they had entered the office building, they came out with Lawrence Lipton in handcuffs, pathetically trying to shield his face. What a scene. They wanted to make a show of this, didn't they? Why do that, he wondered. To prove how tough they were, how smart? But they weren't smart. I will show you how tough and smart you need to be. I will show you how lacking you are in every way. He instructed his driver to start the car. The wheelman did not look around at his boss in the back seat. He said nothing. He knew not to question orders. The wolf's ways were strange and unorthodox, but they worked. "Drive past them," he ordered. "I want to say hello." The FBI agents were casting nervous looks around the street as they led Lawrence Lipton toward a waiting van. A black man walked beside Sterling, tall and strangely confident. Pasha Sorokin knew from his informant in the bureau that this was Alex Cross, and that he was held in high regard. How was it possible that a black man was given command of the raid, he wondered. In Russia, the American Negro was looked down upon. Sorokin had never gotten past his own prejudice. There was no reason to in the U.S. "Get me close," he told the driver. He lowered the rear passenger side window. The second Cross and Lipton had passed his car. Sorokin thrust out an automatic weapon and aimed it at the back of Sterling's head. Then an amazing thing, something he hadn't anticipated, happened. Alex Cross threw Lipton down onto the pavement, and they both rolled behind a parked car. How had Cross known? What had he seen to alert him? Sorokin fired anyway, but he didn't really have a clear shot. Still, the gunshot rang out loudly. He had delivered a message. Sterling wasn't safe. Sterling was a dead man.
Chapter 97. We transported Lawrence Lipton to the Dallas field office and held him there. I threatened to transfer him to Washington if there was any interference from the local police or even the press. I struck a deal with them. I promised Dallas detectives they'd have their turn with Lipton, as soon as I was done. At 11 o'clock that night, I slumped into a windowless interview room. It was sterile and claustrophobic, and I felt as if I'd been there a couple hundred times before. I nodded to Lawrence Lipton. He didn't respond. He looked just awful. Probably I did, too. "We can help you, your family. We'll keep them safe. Nobody else can help you now," I said. That's the truth. Lipton finally spoke to me.
"I don't want to talk to you again. I already told you I'm not involved in any of this shit you say I am. I'm not going to talk anymore. Get my lawyer."
He waved me away. For the past 7 hours, he'd been questioned by other FBI agents. This was my third session, and it wasn't getting easier. His lawyers were in the building, but they'd backed off. They had been informed that he could be formally charged with kidnapping and conspiracy to commit murder, and immediately transported to Washington. His father was also in the building, but had been denied access to his son. I'd interviewed Henry Lipton, and he had wept and insisted his son's arrest was a mistake. I sat down across from Lawrence. "Your father's in the building. Would you like to see him?" I asked. He laughed.
"Yeah, sure. All I have to do is admit that I'm a kidnapper and a murderer. Then I can see my father and ask his forgiveness for my sins."
I ignored the sarcasm. He wasn't very good at it. "You know, we can confiscate the records of your father's company, shut it down. Also, your father is a likely target for the wolf. We're not here to hurt your family members," I added. "Not unless your father is involved in this, too." He shook his head, kept his eyes lowered.
"My father has never been in trouble."
"That's what I keep hearing," I said. "I've read a lot about you and your family in the past day or so. Gone all the way back to your school days at Texas. You were involved in a couple of scrapes in Austin. 2 date rapes. Neither case went to trial. Your father saved you then. It won't happen this time." Lawrence Lipton didn't respond. His eyes were dead, and he looked as if he hadn't slept in days. His blue dress shirt was as wrinkled as a used tissue, soaked with perspiration at the underarms. His hair was wet, dripping little rivers of moisture down to his shirt collar and sideburns. The skin under his eyes sagged and had a purplish tint in the harsh interrogation room light. He finally said,
I don't want my family hurt. You leave my father out of this. Get him protection.
I nodded. Okay, Lawrence. Where do we start? I'm ready to put your family in protective custody until we catch him.
And afterward, it doesn't stop with him.
We'll protect your family. Lipton sighed loudly, then said,
All right. I'm the money man. I'm Sterling. I might be able to get you to the wolf, but I need promises in writing. Lots of promises.
Chapter 98. I was heading into the deepest darkness again. Attached to it as most people are attached to sunlight. I kept thinking about Elizabeth Connolly, still missing and feared dead. Lipton's father visited him a couple of times, and the two men wept together. Mrs. Lipton was allowed to see her husband. There was a lot of crying among the family members, and most of the emotions seemed genuine. I was in the interrogation room with Sterling until a little past 3 in the morning. I was prepared to stay later, as long as it took to get the information I needed. Several deals were struck with his lawyers during the night. At around 2, with most of the lawyering done, Lipton and I sat down to talk again. 2 senior agents from the Dallas field office were in the room with us. They were only there to take notes and tape record. This was my interview to conduct. How did you get involved with the wolf? I asked Lawrence Lipton, after a few minutes during which I emphasized my concern for his family. He seemed clearer-headed and more focused than he'd been a few hours before. I sensed that a weight had been lifted from him. Guilt, betrayal of his family, especially his father. His school records revealed he was a bright but troubled student. His problems always centered on an obsession with sex, but he'd never received a day of treatment. Lawrence Lipton was a freak.
How did I get involved?
He repeated, seeming to be asking the question of himself.
I have a thing for young girls, you see. Teens, preteens. There's lots of it available these days. The internet opened new sources.
For what? Be as concrete as you can, Lawrence. He shrugged.
For freaks like myself. Nowadays we can get what we want when we want it, and I know how to search for the nastiest sites. At first, I settled for photos and movies. I especially liked real-time films.
We found some. In your office at home.
And one day a man came to see me. He came to the office just like you did.
To blackmail you? Lipton shook his head.
No, not blackmail. He said he wanted to know what I really wanted, sexually, and he would help me to get it. I threw him out. He came back the next day. He had records of everything I'd bought on the internet. So what do you really want? He asked again. I wanted young girls, pretty ones, with no strings attached, no rules. He supplied me with 2 or 3 a month, exactly what I fantasized. Color of hair, shape of breasts, shoe size, freckles, anything I desired.
What happened to the girls? Did you murder them? You have to tell me.
I'm not a killer. I like to see the girls get off. Some did. We'd party, then they'd be released. Always. They didn't know who I was or where I was from.
So you were satisfied with the arrangement? Lipton nodded and his eyes lit up.
Very. I'd been dreaming of this my whole life. The reality was as good as the fantasy. Of course, there was a price.
A bill had to be paid?
Oh, yeah. I got to meet the wolf. At least I think it was him. He had sent an emissary to my office in the early days, but then he came to see me. In person, he was very scary. Red Mafia, he said. The KGB came up, but I don't know what his connection to them was.
What did he want from you?
To go into business with him, to be a partner. He needed my company's expertise with computers and the internet. The sex club was secondary with him, a throw-in. He was heavily into extortion, money laundering, counterfeiting. The club was my thing. Once our deal was struck, I went looking for wealthy freaks who wanted their dreams fulfilled. Freaks who were willing to spend 6 figures for a slave. Male, female, didn't matter.